Israel already attacked. The United States joined in. The International Atomic Energy Agency was complicit in this attack. The United States used the promise of diplomacy to set up the attack. Analysis, you look at 60% enriched uranium, you go, why do you have it? What's the purpose of it? But, the Iranians have answered that question. They have it because story threads coming together at the same time. These are going to do that. I mean, this is Zelensky saying what Trump is saying. Is that how Trump speaks about the Russians? I mean, it just shows a level of immaturity and a lack of seriousness, which is exactly what's happening, because this is a 100% con game put on by one of the greatest con artists in the world, Donald Trump, and Benjamin Netanyahu. There's no peace plan here, literally nothing. And if anybody believes there will be a peace plan, I got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you. Pretty cool price. Motherships, we got to close everything down. And then they meet with Trump, and, Trump is like, I mean, if what, Zelensky says is true, I mean, this is crude.
According to Hamas figures, they killed over 100 people last night. Is greater than. Again, just going off of the news reports, Israel used an incident that allegedly took place in Rafah, a place where Hamas says they have no presence. Somebody allegedly fired upon an Israeli soldier, and they used this as an excuse to unleash, an aerial assault on civilian targets in Gaza, killing, again, according to reports, 100 children. And now Israel says that it has stopped and it will once again, recognize the ceasefire. But I think this is a deliberate ploy on the part of Israel to send a signal that they are the permanent occupiers, that even under ceasefire conditions, Israel retains the right to strike anytime, any place, against anyone, without any fear of consequence. According to the Prime Minister's office, President Trump was informed of Prime Minister Netanyahu's instructions to respond with great force. I think that's the language that was used when translated into English, and he approved it. Could you imagine Netanyahu asking Trump for permission when he wants to start killing Palestinians again? Well, I don't imagine that Netanyahu asked for permission. I think Netanyahu informed Donald Trump, based upon pre-existing agreements that were in place, that if Hamas, violated in accordance with Israeli definitions of violation any aspect of his agreement, that Israel retained the right to strike. And so I think that Netanyahu simply told Trump, the Hamas did this and we will be striking. He doesn't want Trump to be taken by surprise while on an overseas trip, because Trump has an ability when taken by surprise to say things off the cuff. And I think Israel is very concerned about narrative control here. But the idea that Netanyahu asked Trump for permission, I don't buy into that. Is greater than, has Hamas rearmed during this, I hate to call it a ceasefire, it's not a ceasefire, this interregnum is greater than, I don't believe they've rearmed. I believe they've continued to retain their weapons. They haven't disarmed. To rearm would require, outside suppliers, using existing, supply lines. I don't think Hamas would risk the ceasefire carrying out the kind of precipitous action. I think Hamas has more than enough weaponry to defend itself and to carry out operations if called upon to do so. But I do believe that Hamas is serious about this ceasefire agreement, would like to see it go forward. So I don't think that they're actively seeking to acquire weaponry from outside sources, because that just creates the opportunity to give the Israelis on a silver platter what they want. Excuse bomb. Is greater than, is Hamas alive and well? Can they defend adequately and substantially against an IDF incursion if the Israelis come up with a pretext for executing one? Is greater than, the answer is yes. We know this because Israel launched their vaunted, final assault in the Gaza that quickly got mired down. That's why we have a ceasefire agreement today, because Israel tried to defeat Hamas and couldn't. Hamas continued to resist and was slaughtering Israeli soldiers on a daily basis. And so should Israel choose to, re-engage Hamas, I believe Hamas has the ability to continue to resist as effectively as they have in the past. Is the Wittenoff Kushner-Trump Gaza plan just a scam to get the Israeli hostages home from the right-wing Israeli perspective? Is greater than, oh, there's no doubt about it. Ben-Gvir has said so. that they simply, we got our hostages home. They said, now it's the time to go in and finish the job. So clearly, from the perspective of the right-wing political element in Israel that, support Benjamin Netanyahu, that there was no intention of a real ceasefire. They have no intention of allowing the conditions to come into being that could lead to a Palestinian state. They want to terminate Hamas forever. But they had a huge political nightmare, which was the hostages. This was causing huge political unrest in Israel. So they believe that they have solved this problem, and now they would like to go in and finish, what they started, which is the absolute elimination of Hamas was always a sham. And for the Trump-Kushner-Witoff triumvirate to pretend otherwise is absurd. Now, the question is, if you know that they believe it's a scam, what are you, the United States, these three, willing to do to ensure that it isn't a scam? Because if you don't have a plan in place to respond to the binge of Israel, then you're part of the scam. When Trump says that he's not going to allow the Israelis to annex the West Bank, is he playing word games since they have effectively de facto annexed it already? Is greater than. Of course, he's playing word games. How else do you explain the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, arriving in Israel only to have the mess at the Israeli parliament vote in favor of the annexation? They're not even disguising it. They basically waited until the number 2 man in America showed up in Israel and said, hey, we're voting in favor of annexation. Now, Benjamin Daniel came out and said, I can't control the parliament. It's like your Congress. No, he can. And this vote took place. And it was a signal from the Israelis to the United States that we're going to do whatever we want to do, regardless of what you think. Switching gears, what is your understanding, Scott, of the Russian view? I'll make it more precise. The Kremlin's view of the U.S. cancellation of the planned Putin-Trump meeting in Budapest is greater than. This was a meeting that came at the request of the Trump administration. The Russians were more than happy to participate in this meeting. The United States backed away when it became clear that the Russians had no intention of caving into the United States' demands. The Russian position regarding Ukraine's ceasefire, termination of conflict, are quite clear and haven't changed, unlike the American position, which flops around every day. But now what's happened is because the Trump administration, tried to blame the Russians on this, the Russians have come back with some very stark language. In short, there will be no meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump until the United States comes up with a workable plan. They flip the script always. It was the Trump administration. We need Russia to come up with a workable plan. The Russians say we have the plan. It's being implemented as we speak. It's playing out in ground truth on the ground in Ukraine. That's our plan. If you don't want that plan, you come up with something, but it has to be reasonable. Until you do so, we're just not interested in meeting is greater than. Is greater than is the culprit here. Marco Rubio, who of course comes from his whole career, has been Russia bashing, put aside his Zionist views, Russia bashing from the sort of Victoria Nuland, Hillary Clinton school of Russia and Ukraine. And I know just from watching his face and his hands that Sergei Lavrov was not happy after their last telephone call. We don't know exactly what they said, but is Rubio the culprit here? Is he a trustworthy ally agent of Donald Trump to bring about peace? Or do you think he, like his neocon buddies, does not want peace, wants the war to go on because of their crazy idea that this will drain Russia and weaken Putin? Is greater than. Well, first of all, we need to be clear that Marco Rubio hates and despises Donald Trump. It's 100% certain. You only have to go back to the campaigns of 2016 to understand just how much Marco Rubio despises Donald Trump, the disdain he holds towards Donald Trump. But Marco Rubio is the byproduct of Donald Trump selling his soul to Miriam Adlison in the Israeli lobby. 100 million bought Marco Rubio the Secretary of State position. Donald Trump doesn't like him, doesn't want him, but he put him in there. Now, if this was is greater than, did she originally want him to be vice president? And Trump said, I couldn't stand working with him on a daily basis. Is greater than 100%. She originally wanted him to be the vice president, and Trump drew the line there. So Rubio got the next best slot. Is greater than $100 million for the vice presidency. Or second place, the Secretary of State is greater than. You know, there was a governor of Illinois that went to jail for selling the Senate seat. Donald Trump sold the Secretary of State seat for, I don't know, is greater than, correct. Rod Blagojevich, whom Trump pardoned. And so, but, you know, if this was Trump's first rodeo, you could say that he didn't understand Washington, D.C. politics, that he thought that Marco Rubio, once given the Secretary of State position, would subordinate his personal whims and desires to the needs of the nation as dictated by the man who was elected president by the American people. This is his second go-round. You see, he used to have a Secretary of State named Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo stabbed him in the back repeatedly, and Trump has acknowledged this. He said Pompeo was a bad man, John Bolton was a bad man. Well, now John Bolton was the National Security Advisor. Now we have the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor rolled up into one person, Marco Rubio, who's a bad man. Yes, we can blame Marco Rubio. He doesn't want peace with Russia, not at all. And he's sabotaging this right and left. He's giving a platform for people like Keith Kellogg. He's, you know, advocating on behalf of Scott Bessant. He's doing everything he can to push the, you know, the anti-Russian policy agenda of the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party. But the blame rests with the commander-in-chief, okay? You're the one who agreed to this compromise to put Marco Rubio in. You're the one who allowed him to double hap as the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State. You're the one who said you wanted peace with Russia, and you're the one who is silent while Marco Rubio sabotages you. So what we're seeing here is that Donald Trump is actually one of the weakest presidents that's ever served in that office. Whenever there is significant pushback from members of the establishment, Donald Trump folds like a house of cards every single time. Is Marco Rubio wedded to the D.C. war lobby? He must. Is greater than, well, we're going to go to war with Venezuela in the very near future. Is greater than, and that's a Marco Rubio war. Is greater than 100% Marco Rubio war driven by Marco Rubio. He's been praying for this war, this opportunity, since 2016. And he's going to put us in a war that's going to be worse than Vietnam. It's going to be a national nightmare. You know, it's going to be everything that we don't need right now. And the irony is we're sitting here, you know, taking this highfalutin stance against Russia for their illegal invasion of Ukraine, total disregard for the historical fact. While we're preparing in the name of the Monroe Doctrine to invade and occupy and remove a government in Venezuela and probably in Colombia as well, is greater than I. I just want to jump off of Ukraine. We'll get back to it and on to Venezuela for a moment. Are there 10,000 of your fellow Marines aboard ship off the coast of Venezuela as we speak? 10,000 is greater than? It appears to be. Yeah, that's what we do for a living. We float on ships off the coast of countries that our nation is preparing to invade. And is greater than, well, 10,000 troops must mean a ground invasion supported by air or supported by Navy, but ground. What else could they be doing? Is greater than. Well, there's a number of missions that embarked Marines can carry. One is, of course, just a presence to hold the Venezuelans in place, to put fear in the hearts of the Venezuelans, force the Venezuelans to take certain actions. You know, Marines can carry out raids where we go in with a carefully crafted, you know, package to go in and accomplish a mission, whether it is to, for instance, capture Maduro, seize, you know, critical infrastructure, to destroy things. You know, go in, do your job, come out. A 10,000 can get you a small foothold, but not much more than that. You're not going to occupy a country the size of Venezuela with a force of 10,000 Marines, no matter how good the Marines are. But with 10,000 Marines, you do have the ability to, you know, to go in and do limited scope and scale military actions. Like I said, the biggest thing they do is just to have this force and readiness that forces the Venezuelans to make sure they have forces available to respond to any potential incursion by the Marines. Do you see a line of moral relativism between Netanyahu and Trump? Trump killing innocents aboard the ships in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. Trump willing to invade without even consulting Congress much less getting a declaration of war. Netanyahu wantonly killing and looking for excuses to do it, even if the victims are children and babies. Well, first of all, the genocide that Netanyahu is carrying out in Gaza couldn't have been done without the support of Donald Trump in the United States. So Donald Trump is as guilty for the deaths of the Gazans in Palestine, in Gaza, as Netanyahu is. Donald Benjamin Netanyahu is not an American leader. So that, I condemn him wholeheartedly and I despise him. But he didn't take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Donald Trump did. And Donald Trump is operating in wanting violation of the Constitution. He's committing murder, acts of war crimes every time he goes forth. We do not have a state of war between the United States and Venezuela. Therefore, every one of these ships has to be treated as a non-combatant and cannot be fired upon unless they direct you potentially lethal action against an approaching American vessel. We must close with and ascertain if any laws have been broken. And if laws have been broken, then we detain and bring to justice. What we're doing is murdering people, straight up murdering. And we have a president bragging about it. And we have Lindsey Graham, behaving, this corpulent, fat-faced fool you up there, behaving if he's, Hermann Goring in 1943, stuffing his face, giggling about what he's going to do to Venezuela. I want to remind Lindsey Graham that Henry Gordon was eventually arrested and brought to justice, and he chomped down on a cyanide tablet to avoid being found guilty and hung by the neck until death. That if there was any justice in this world, you might want to invest in a cyanide caplet of, Mr. Graham, because your future would be to be arrested and prosecuted as a war criminal. Somebody who's advocating for a war of aggression, which the Nuremberg trial found to be the greatest of all war crimes, because from the war of aggression, all other crimes emanate. Chris, while I'm talking to Scott, do we have that clip of Senator Graham that ends with a Maduro, better watch out? Not to raise your blood pressure, but it's an example of him exactly as you described. Here it is. We looked at the JAG manual. Preventative self-defense employed to counter non-imminent threats is illegal under international law. So if we are not at war and these suspected criminals pose no threat of imminent violence, isn't this potentially a war crime to be killing the people on these boats and then to be taking out a leader? No, not at all. I don't know what Manuel you're referring to, but I know what President Bush 41 did. He took down Ortega, the leader of Panama, because he was involved in drug trafficking, threatening our country. Venezuela is now partnering with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is running out of money because Iran is weak, partnering with drug cartels in Venezuela. No, it should have stopped. Here's what's new. You got a commander-in-chief's not going to put up with this crap. We're not going to sit on the sidelines and watch boats full of drugs come to our country. We're going to blow them up and kill the people that want to poison America. And we're now going to expand operations, I think, to the land. So please be clear about what I'm saying today. President Donald Trump sees Venezuela and Colombia as direct threats to our country because they house narratist organizations. The leader of Venezuela is an indicted drug dealer in American courts. So yeah, the game is changing when it comes to drug traffickers and drug cartels. We're going to use military force like we have in the past to protect our country. That's the new game we're playing, and I'm glad we're playing that game. And if I were Maduro, I'd find a way to leave before he goes down. Person, a lawyer no less, who's taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, favors these murders. Does he know what he's talking about is greater than? Not at all. First of all, Judge, you know this. An indictment is not a finding of guilt. Is greater than. Correct. Bottom of each indictment, it says people are innocent of all charges until found guilty in a court of law. So Lindsey Graham's acting as if an indictment passed down by the Southern District of New York through a grand jury, which we know federal grand juries can indict a ham sandwich. That the corruption of our legal system and the process is such that we can manufacture data, we can put it before a jury, and we can indict anybody in the world we want to of any charge we want to. And that's what we did, a politically motivated indictment against Maduro so that we can label him as such. But he's not guilty of anything. He's not been found guilty of anything. It's just probable cause through a grand jury process. And for Lindsey Graham to act now as if he is judge, jury, and executioner shows how this lawyer, who should be disbarred, by the way, for his flagrant disregard for due process in the Constitution, but it just shows you how low we have sunk as a nation, where we have a sitting senator who is what the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, acting as if we actually live in a land where, justice is a game where we can do anything we want to because, my God, we can do it. That's not what America is supposed to be. And I also want to remind him that the president, has to go to Congress for this. This is not, the War Powers Act grants the president ability to engage U.S. forces under circumstances in which otherwise you could not approach Congress for a declaration of war. For instance, we're being attacked or there's an imminent risk of being attacked. There is no imminent threat coming from Venezuela, that if we want to go to war against Venezuela and you think you can articulate the case, take it to Congress. Let Congress vote on this. But that's not what's going to happen. The president's just going to go forward and commit American troops to what's going to be a national nightmare. Is greater than, back to Ukraine. In the past 10 days, the president has imposed sanctions on two of the largest Russian oil producers. Are the El Rosneft and Lucy, are those sanctions going to affect the Russian economy, or the special military operation substantially is greater than? They're not going to affect the special military operation at all. The Russian economy, of course, will have to make adjustments. It's a new reality, but this isn't as though the Russian government woke up the other day and went, oh my God, they sanctioned Lucy. We didn't see that coming. It's been threatened for some time now. Scott Bessent, before he became Secretary of Treasury, was saying, we're going to do just this. We're going to collapse the Russian economy. We're going to bring down Vladimir Putin. Russia's just a giant gas station with nuclear weapons. So we're going to deny them the gas. Russia's prepared for this, and they're making the appropriate adjustments as we speak. Don't believe the headlines you see. Russia still sells significant oil to India and significant oil to China, and that's not going to change. They're also selling significant oil to other nations in the global south. The one thing that Basson maybe doesn't understand is that by doing this, you create market turmoil, that Russia, the ability to sell a couple 100,000 barrels of oil a day on the market. The oil that Russia is selling is, they're going to demand a higher price, which means Russia can outbid the competitors. One of the things Russia can do better than any other oil-producing nation in the world is sell oil at a discount, because it doesn't cost Russia as much money to get that oil out of the ground as it does for United States, Saudi Arabia, and other nations. So Russia can steeply discount and continue the volume production that they're doing. This changes absolutely nothing when it comes to the strategic picture. What it does is further isolate the United States, because now we're in a situation where we have told the Indians, we run your energy security policy, and the Indians are taking over that, and Trump's going to try and put pressure on China and tell China you can't buy Russian oil. Watch how good that works out. Watch the humiliation that's going to take place when Donald Trump and President Xi sit down and start hashing out their trade relationships. China will not budge 1 inch on Russian oil, and China's not going to budge on just about anything else. Hasn't Trump's efforts to diminish Russia economically, in fact, enhanced Russia's economic independence and strengthened BRICS is greater than. Look, the sanctions are serious. Let's not pretend it's not serious. Russia, like any other nation, would prefer to function in an economic environment that's normal, based upon laws and contracts and things of that nature. But since 2022, actually since 2014, Russia's had to adapt to, the world of sanctions. And they have, what's happened here is Russia's actually become a far healthier economy, because first of all, Russia continued to have to operate under the yoke of the Boris Yeltsin era oligarchs. These corrupt individuals who went in and bought, state enterprises for pennies to the dollar, kopecks to the ruble, and amassed great fortunes, and then transferred much of their wealth outside of Russia. So instead of Russia generating wealth and having it reinvested in Russia, helping create growth, they were moving it outside, and they maintained tremendous amount of economic and political influence. Vladimir Putin, did crack down on some, but you can't crack down on them all. It's a reality of Russia that no longer exists, because after 2022, the West sanctioned these oligarchs, and Putin said, you're on your own. You're the guys who made the decision to take your wealth of your money you make, gets reinvested back into Russia. That's it. And it changed the relationship with the oligarchs. And it also redefined how Russia, functions. They no longer are dependent upon Western companies. Look at Boeing. Boeing and Airbus have committed suicide here because they've gone along with these sanctions. And what has Russia's response been? To build their own domestic airline industry that today produces competitive aircraft with 100% made in Russia components. This wasn't going to happen. Russia wasn't going in this direction. But because of sanctions, they had no choice. And all of Russia's industry is that way today. Russia doesn't need the West anymore. That's why Russia is, in effect, sanctioned proof, is there developing in Russia? You and I were just there for a week and I didn't detect any of this. You have a lot more friends there than I do, and you were gracious enough to introduce me to your wonderful friends, for which I'm deeply grateful, as you know. Is there developing in Russia a sense of impatience, military operation? Look, Russia, believe it or not, has a relatively free press. There is a chattering class in Russia, especially in the blogger sphere, and they have made their reputations and their money off of sniping at the Russian government. Vladimir Putin, Gerasimov before that show, the Minister of Defense. And so if you're looking for evidence of dissatisfaction in Russia, you can find it. But you need to be careful because this chattering class exists for. It's the same thing here in the United States. We have a whole bunch of bloggers and people who exist to get clicks, to generate clicks, to get attention, to get viewership. And so they exaggerate things. They make things up out of whole cloth, but they aren't representative of reality, fact-based reality. The fact-based reality of Russia is that Russia as a nation is committed to victory. Russia as a nation is committed to victory. That victory doesn't come with a timeline. This isn't victory with the caveat. It has to be done by this date, that date, or this date. Russia as a nation is committed to victory. And Russia overwhelmingly supports the leadership that it has, who will deliver victory to them, and they are confident that this will be done the right way. They're not in a rush. The only people that are in a rush for this war to come to an end is in the West, because we're the ones you keep putting calendar. Russia's just in the business to get that job done, and they don't give a damn about our calendar. Is greater than. Given the economic and political weakness in Western Europe, and given the mercurial nature of Trump, one day threatening tomahawks, the next day saying no, how much longer do you think Zelensky and company can last? I mean, stated differently, how much longer can the Ukraine military last? Is greater than. I want to remind people, Ukraine is the second largest nation in Europe after European Russia.